In the spring market of Nordheim, where merchants hawk their wares and the scent of roasted meat fills the air, Gunnar Ironsson made a decision that would change everything. When he spotted the iron cage holding a giant wolf, a towering beast with silver-grey fur and a shoulder height that dwarfed even the largest war horses, something stirred in his gentle heart. The massive creature had eyes like winter lightning, and while other folk whispered of curses and highland demons, Gunnar saw only a magnificent being in need. Against every warning from friend and stranger, he traded his silver ring and a barrel of his finest ale to free the giant wolf. The village called him mad, but months later, as the enormous beast guards their children and senses danger before it arrives, even the wisest elders wonder if Gunnar's act of kindness awakened something far greater than they imagined. Was this truly just a giant wolf he rescued that day? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wooden mead cup felt warm in Gunnar Ironsson's weathered hands as he sat beside the great hearth in his modest dwelling. Carved by his grandfather's grandfather, the cup bore the intricate knotwork patterns that told the story of his bloodline, merchants and peacemakers, rather than raiders and conquerors. Outside, the giant wolf that had changed his life rested in the yard, its massive form creating a shadow that stretched across the herb garden his mother had planted decades ago. Nordheim village nestled in a valley where two rivers met, protected by rolling hills thick with pine and birch. The settlement had grown prosperous through trade rather than warfare, though every man could wield a sword when necessary. Gunnar had chosen a different path from his warrior father, who had fallen in the great raids of his youth. Where Olaf Ironsson had been known for his fierce battle cry, Gunnar earned respect through his quick wit, generous spirit, and uncanny ability to settle disputes with laughter rather than blood. The morning sun filtered through the smoke hole above, illuminating the simple furnishings that spoke of contentment rather than wealth. A loom stood in one corner where his late wife had woven, now draped with the blanket that covered the wolf on cold nights. Shelves lined the walls, holding jars of preserved foods, trading goods, and the small treasures he had collected in his 43 years of life. Still brooding over that beast, are you? Astrid's voice carried the authority of her 70 winters as she entered without ceremony, her walking staff tapping against the hard-packed earth floor. The village's eldest member had served as their unofficial leader since before Gunnar's birth. Her silver hair braided with colored threads that marked her status as keeper of the old stories. Hardly brooding, Gunnar replied, setting down his cup with a gentle smile. More like wondering. That wolf has brought nothing but good fortune since I freed him from that cage 3 months past. Astrid settled onto the wooden stool across from him, her pale blue eyes studying his face with the intensity that had made her legendary for reading the truth in men's hearts.
Good fortune, yes.
But also questions. Eric stopped by my dwelling this morning, asking again why you would risk everything for a beast that might have torn your throat out. Through the open doorway, they could see Eric Stormson sharpening his battle axe beside the village well. At 35, he represented the old ways, scarred from raids, suspicious of change, quick to reach for steel when words might suffice. Yet even Eric had begun to soften his stance as the wolf proved its worth time and again. Eric sees threats where I see possibilities, Gunnar said, watching his friend work the whetstone across the blade with practiced efficiency. That wolf has never shown aggression toward any villager. The children adore him. As if summoned by their conversation, young Bjorn came running down the path, his 8-year-old legs carrying him with the boundless energy of youth. Behind him walked his older sister Thora, 15, and beginning to show the quiet wisdom that would make her a leader someday. Both children paused at Gunnar's doorway, offering respectful nods to Astrid before addressing him. "Gunnar," Bjorn panted, "Mother says we can visit the wolf if you agree. Thora wants to show him the new song she learned." The giant wolf raised its massive head at the sound of voices, those storm-grey eyes focusing on the children with an intelligence that never failed to unsettle the adults. Standing, The beast measured nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, its silver coat shimmering in the morning light. When it approached the children, moving with surprising grace for something so large, Bjorn giggled and reached out to stroke the thick fur. "He likes music," Gunnar told them, remembering how the wolf would tilt its head whenever the villagers sang during their evening gatherings. "But remember what I taught you about respect. This is no tame dog." Thora began humming a melody about spring flowers, and the wolf's ears perked forward with obvious interest. The sight of the massive predator sitting patiently while children played around it had become commonplace. Yet it still amazed those who remembered the fear that had gripped the village when Gunnar first brought the beast home. "The trader who sold him to you," Astrid said quietly, watching the children interact with the wolf. "Did he say where the beast was captured?" "Only that hunters found him in the high valleys, near the old standing stones. Said he was alone, which struck them as odd. Wolves run in packs, yet this one showed no sign of companions." Astrid's expression grew thoughtful. "The high valleys have always been strange places. My grandmother used to tell stories about what lived up there before our people came to these lands." The wolf suddenly lifted its head, ears swiveling toward the forest path that led to the village center. Moments later, they heard the approach of footsteps and the jingle of bronze ornaments that announced a traveler's arrival. The beast's reaction to sounds and scents beyond human perception had become another source of wonder among the villagers. "Merchant coming," Gunnar said, recognizing the pattern. "The wolf always knows before we see them." Indeed, within minutes a weather-beaten trader appeared on the path, leading a pack-horse laden with goods from the eastern settlements. The wolf watched the newcomer with calm attention, but showed no sign of concern, another behavior that had earned the villagers' trust. When danger approached, the beast grew restless and alert. When peaceful visitors arrived, it remained relaxed. "That animal has better judgment of character than most men," Eric called out, having noticed the wolf's reaction as well. "I'll grant you that much, Gunnar." The afternoon passed in the comfortable rhythm of village life. The trader displayed his wares in the common area, sharing news from other settlements, while the villagers examined pottery, iron tools, and bolts of dyed cloth. The wolf remained nearby, accepting gentle touches from those brave enough to approach, while maintaining a watchful presence that somehow made everyone feel safer. As evening approached and the trader prepared to depart, he paused beside Gunnar with a puzzled expression. "That wolf of yours," he said, keeping his voice low. "My horse has been around many dangerous beasts, but she shows no fear of him. Animals usually know when something might eat them." Gunnar considered this as he watched the wolf settle down for the night, its massive form curled against the side of his dwelling like a faithful guardian. 3 months had passed since that day at the spring market. 3 months of watching this magnificent creature integrate into their peaceful community without a single incident of aggression or hunting. The beast seemed content with the fish Gunnar provided and the respect the villagers had learned to offer, yet questions lingered in the quiet moments before sleep. Questions that grew more complex with each passing day as the wolf demonstrated intelligence and awareness that challenged everything Gunnar thought he knew about the natural world. The summer festival arrived with the warmth of long days and the laughter of children echoing through Nordheim streets. Colorful banners fluttered from every doorway, and the air carried the mingled scents of honeycakes, roasted meat, and the wildflowers that young ones wove into crowns for the celebration. Gunnar watched from his doorway as the giant wolf observed the festivities with those intelligent, storm-grey eyes, the beast's ears twitching at each burst of joyful noise. 6-year-old Ingrid, the blacksmith's daughter, danced around the village square with her wooden toy horse clutched tightly in her small hands. The carved figure had been her constant companion since her father crafted it for her last winter, its smooth surface worn bright by countless hours of play. She galloped between the adults, making soft, whinnying sounds as she guided her imaginary steed through elaborate adventures only she could see. "Stay close to the square. Little one," her mother called out. But Ingrid was already spinning away toward the forest edge, lost in the magical world of her imagination. The wolf suddenly raised its massive head, nostrils flaring as it caught a scent that made its entire body tense. Gunnar felt a chill run down his spine as he watched the beast's ears flatten against its skull, a warning sign he had learned to recognize. "Something was wrong, Ingrid!" The blacksmith's voice cracked with sudden panic as he realized his daughter had vanished from the celebration. "Has anyone seen Ingrid?" The festival's joy transformed into urgent concern as parents gathered their own children closer and men began calling the girl's name. Torches were hastily lit as the afternoon shadows lengthened, and search parties formed with grim efficiency born from too many stories of children lost to wolves, bears, or the treacherous ravines that scarred the surrounding hills. Eric took charge of the search with military precision, organizing the villagers into groups that would cover the most likely paths a curious child might take. "She can't have gone far," he declared, though worry lined his weathered features. "Small legs, maybe an hour's head start at most." Gunnar joined the search, but the giant wolf had already begun moving toward the dark line of pines that bordered their valley. The beast's behavior was unlike anything he had witnessed before, purposeful, urgent, as if following some trail invisible to human senses. When Gunnar called to it, the wolf paused only long enough to look back with eyes that seemed to plead for him to follow. "The wolf has found something," Gunnar announced to the nearest search party. "I'm going to follow him." Several villagers exchanged doubtful glances, but Astrid stepped forward with her walking staff in hand. "That beast has shown more wisdom than most men since you brought him here. If he knows where the child has gone, we should trust his instincts." The wolf led them into the forest, along paths so faint they would have been invisible without the beast's guidance. Its massive paws found purchase on slopes where humans struggled, and its nose remained fixed on a scent trail that grew stronger with each passing moment. Behind them, the festival torches became distant points of light as they pushed deeper into the wilderness. "How can he track her when our best hunters found nothing?" Eric muttered, following close behind Gunnar as they navigated a particularly treacherous stretch of loose stone. "Maybe he sees things we cannot," Gunnar replied, watching the wolf's silver coat gleam in the fading light. "Or maybe he understands something about children that we have forgotten." The trail led them up a ridge where ancient pines grew so thick that starlight barely penetrated the canopy. The wolf's pace quickened, and they heard it whine, a sound so full of urgency that it sent ice through Gunnar's veins. Ahead, barely visible in the darkness, yawned the mouth of a cave that local hunters avoided. Old stories claimed bears denned there, or worse things that preferred the deep places beneath the earth. The wolf disappeared into the cave's entrance, and moments later they heard its howl echo from the depths, not the hunting cry of a predator, but something almost human in its anguish. Without hesitation, Gunnar followed, torch in hand. While Eric and the others prepared their weapons for whatever they might find, the cave stretched deeper than expected, its walls carved by ancient waters into smooth channels that reflected their torchlight in dancing patterns. The wolf's howling grew more distant, leading them through passages where the air grew cold and stale. When they finally caught up to the beast, they found it lying beside a small form, huddled against the far wall of a natural chamber. Ingrid sat cradled in a nest of stones and fallen leaves, her toy horse still clutched in one hand, while tears streaked her dirt-stained cheeks. Her left ankle was swollen and painful, clearly twisted during whatever fall had trapped her in this hidden place. The wolf lay beside her like a living blanket, its warm breath misting in the cold air as it kept vigil over the frightened child. "Papa?" Ingrid whispered when she saw the torchlight, hope flooding her young voice. "I got lost. The big wolf found me and kept me warm." Eric stared in amazement as the giant wolf gently nuzzled the child's face before moving aside to allow the rescue. "By Thor's hammer," he breathed. "That beast led us straight to her." How did it know? They carried Ingrid from the cave with the wolf padding silently alongside, its mission complete, but its watchful alertness unchanged. The journey back to the village took twice as long with an injured child, but the wolf seemed to anticipate their needs. finding the safest paths and pausing whenever they needed to rest. As they emerged from the forest, the festival torches blazed like beacons of hope. The waiting crowd erupted in cheers when they saw Ingrid safe in her father's arms, and the blacksmith wept openly as he held his daughter close. The child insisted on keeping her wooden horse despite its rough journey, the toy now marked with cave dirt that told the story of her adventure. "The wolf saved her," Astrid announced to the gathered villagers, her voice carrying the authority that made her words into truth. Without its guidance, we never would have found that hidden cave in time. The crowd turned to look at the giant wolf with new eyes, no longer seeing a tamed beast or curious oddity, but something approaching reverence. The creature that had been tolerated became something precious, a guardian whose value could not be measured in silver or trade goods. That night, as Ingrid slept safely in her own bed with her rescued toy horse, the entire village understood that Gunnar's act of kindness at the spring market had brought them more than a pet. They had been blessed with a protector whose abilities defied explanation, and whose loyalty to their children ran deeper than any human bond they had witnessed. The giant wolf's intelligence was no longer a curiosity. It was a gift that had saved a life. 3 days after Ingrid's rescue, Gunnar knelt beside the giant wolf in his herb garden, examining the strange object the beast had carried back from the cave. The runestone fragment was no larger than his palm, its surface worn smooth by countless years, yet still bearing carved symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the morning light. The stone felt unnaturally warm against his skin, as if it held some inner fire that defied the cool autumn air. Astrid arrived with the dawn, her walking staff clicking against the stone path as she approached. Her silver hair was braided with blue threads today, the color she wore when dealing with matters of old magic and forgotten wisdom. The wolf lifted its massive head to acknowledge her presence, those storm-grey eyes reflecting a respect that had grown since she had spoken in its defense. "Show me this curiosity your companion discovered," she said, settling onto the wooden stool Gunnar had placed beside the garden. Her voice carried the careful neutrality she used when approaching something that might be dangerous. Gunnar placed the runestone fragment in her weathered hands, watching as her pale blue eyes widened with recognition. The symbols carved into its surface depicted intertwining serpents, runes for storm and protection, and something else, a design that looked remarkably like a wolf's head surrounded by stars. "This is older than our settlement," Astrid murmured, her fingers tracing the carved lines with reverent care. "These markings speak of the time when gods walked among men, when the boundary between the mortal world and the realm of spirits was thin as morning mist." The wolf moved closer, its attention fixed on the runestone with an intensity that made both humans uncomfortable. When Astrid held the fragment toward the beast, its nostrils flared and a low rumble emanated from deep in its chest, not threatening, but something that felt almost like recognition. "It knows this stone," Gunnar observed, studying the wolf's reaction. "Look at how its ears perk forward, how it tilts its head. This means something to him." Over the following days, the wolf's behavior began changing in subtle ways that only careful observation revealed. It would lift its massive head hours before storms arrived, whining softly and pacing the yard until the first raindrops confirmed its predictions. When traders approached along the forest paths, the beast would position itself at the village entrance long before human eyes could spot the travelers. Gunnar found himself sleeping more deeply than he had in years, his dreams filled with vivid images that felt more like memories than imagination. He saw ancient battles fought beneath star-filled skies, warriors who rode alongside wolves as large as horses, and ceremonies conducted around stone circles where the boundary between earth and heaven seemed permeable. The village children had completely overcome their initial fear, gathering around the wolf each morning to share their breakfast porridge and listen to stories. Young Bjorn had appointed himself the beast's official caretaker, bringing fresh water and checking for thorns in its massive paws with the solemnity of sacred duty. "He understands every word we say," Thora informed her parents one evening, her 15-year-old certainty absolute. "When I asked him to watch over my little brother during the harvest work, he nodded. I swear by Freya's golden necklace that Wolf nodded." Eric remained the most skeptical voice among the villagers, though his objections had shifted from outright suspicion to reluctant amazement. He joined Gunnar beside the wolf pen one afternoon, his battle-scarred hands wrapped around a horn of ale as he studied the beast with a warrior's tactical eye. "I've hunted wolves since I was old enough to hold a spear," Eric said, his voice rough with confusion. "They're cunning, yes, but this one thinks like a man. Yesterday, I watched it organize the village dogs into a hunting party that drove rabbits toward the children's snares. No wolf teaches strategy to other animals." The giant wolf lay in the afternoon sun, its silver coat gleaming as it watched the villagers go about their daily tasks. Its presence had become so natural that newcomers often failed to notice the massive predator until they were close enough to count its teeth. Yet those storm-grey eyes missed nothing. Every movement, every sound, every change in wind direction was noted and catalogued by an intelligence that seemed to process information faster than any human mind. Gunnar's dreams grew more frequent and detailed as the autumn progressed. He saw himself standing atop a mountain peak beside a wolf whose fur shone like starlight, both of them watching distant fires that spoke of war and danger approaching from across the sea. In these visions, he wore armor he had never owned and carried weapons he had never lifted. Yet his hands knew their weight and balance, as if they were extensions of his own body. "Your grandfather had dreams like these," Astrid told him one evening as they sat beside his hearth, the runestone fragment resting on the table between them. He spoke of visions that showed him things yet to come, of a heritage that ran deeper than blood and bone. The wolf raised its head from where it rested beside the door, ears swiveling toward the forest path moments before they heard the approaching footsteps. A traveling merchant emerged from the pine shadows, leading a pack horse and calling out the traditional greeting of peaceful intent. Yet the wolf's reaction was different this time. Not the calm acceptance they had grown accustomed to, but a subtle tension that made the fur along its spine rise in warning. "Greetings, friend," the merchant called out, his smile bright beneath a well-trimmed beard. "I seek shelter for the night and trade for whatever goods you might spare." Gunnar rose to welcome the stranger, but the wolf's low growl stopped him short. The beast moved between the merchant and the village center, its massive form blocking the path with deliberate intent. Those storm-grey eyes had turned hard as winter ice, fixed on the newcomer with an intensity that made even Eric reach for his weapon. "Interesting companion you keep," the merchant said, though his jovial tone had gained an edge of unease. "Most unusual coloring for a wolf. Almost looks like silver in this light." The runestone fragment on the table began to grow warm, then hot enough that Astrid had to move it away from the wooden surface. The carved symbols seemed to pulse with their own light, responding to some invisible force that made the very air around them feel charged with potential energy. "Perhaps you should find shelter elsewhere tonight," Gunnar said quietly, trusting the wolf's instincts over the stranger's friendly manner. "The next village is only a few hours' walk." The merchant's smile faltered as he studied the massive wolf that stood guard like a living barrier. "Of course," he replied, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been relief or disappointment. "Safe travels to you all." As the stranger disappeared back into the forest shadows, the wolf remained alert until long after the sound of footsteps had faded. Only then did it return to its resting place, though its ears continued to twitch at sounds too subtle for human perception. That night, Gunnar's dreams were filled with images of ships on dark water and the clash of steel against steel. Astrid's leather-bound saga book lay open on the worn wooden table, its pages yellow with age and filled with the careful script of generations past. The wolf sat beside Gunnar's chair, its massive head resting on its paws as the old woman read aloud from stories that predated their settlement by centuries. Candlelight flickered across the ancient text, illuminating tales of legendary wolves that had once walked alongside the gods themselves. "Listen to this passage," Astrid said, her finger tracing the faded ink as she translated the old tongue. In the days when Odin's ravens flew between worlds, there came great wolves from the realm of spirits, their fur like starlight and their eyes like winter storms. These guardians chose mortals of pure heart to bond with, sharing their divine sight and supernatural strength. The wolf's ears perked forward at the sound of the ancient words, and Gunnar could have sworn he saw recognition flash in those storm-grey eyes. The beast's attention was so focused on Astrid's voice that it seemed to understand every syllable of the old language. The wolves of legend could see through deception, sense danger across great distances, and their chosen human companions became heroes whose names echoed through the ages. Astrid continued, but the bond came with a price. The wolves would fade from the mortal world when their purpose was fulfilled. Returning to the realm of spirits from whence they came, Gunnar reached out to stroke the wolf's silver coat, feeling the warm strength beneath the thick fur. Do you think that's what we're dealing with? A creature from the old stories? Before Astrid could answer, young Bjorn came running up the path, his 8-year-old face bright with excitement. Gunnar, come quickly! The wolf is doing something amazing with the sheep. They followed the boy to the pasture, where the village's small flock grazed beneath the afternoon sun. The giant wolf moved among the sheep with practiced ease, using gentle nudges and strategic positioning to guide them away from a section of fence that showed signs of recent damage. Without the wolf's intervention, the sheep would have wandered through the broken boards and into the forest, where predators waited. He's been at it for an hour, the shepherd told them, amazement clear in his voice. Found that break in the fence and started herding the flock to safety. Never seen anything like it, a wolf protecting sheep instead of hunting them. Eric joined them at the fence line, his skeptical expression softening as he watched the wolf's careful work. That beast understands responsibility, he admitted grudgingly. It knows those sheep belong to the village and acts to protect our property. There's intelligence there that goes beyond animal instinct. The wolf finished its self-appointed task and approached Gunnar with what could only be described as satisfaction in its bearing. Its tail wagged once, a brief acknowledgement of a job well done, before it settled into its usual watchful stance beside the fence. It's as if he considers himself part of our community, Thora observed, scratching behind the wolf's ears with the familiarity of long friendship. Not just Gunnar's companion, but a guardian for all of us. That evening, as the villagers gathered for their weekly storytelling circle, the wolf positioned itself where it could observe everyone present. Children leaned against its warm flanks, while adults shared news and gossip. The beast's presence so natural that newcomers might assume every village kept such a guardian. Gunnar found himself speaking with a confidence that surprised him when disputes arose between neighbors. Words came easily to his tongue, wise counsel that seemed to flow from some deep well of understanding he had never known he possessed. When the miller complained about the baker's pricing, Gunnar proposed a solution that satisfied both parties with fairness that impressed even Eric's military mind. You've changed since the wolf came, Astrid observed privately after the gathering dispersed. There's a clarity to your thoughts, a depth to your wisdom that wasn't there before. The beast's influence on you grows stronger with each passing day. The dreams had indeed intensified, becoming so vivid that Gunnar sometimes woke uncertain whether he had been sleeping or living another life entirely. He saw himself commanding warriors in battles against enemies that seemed more shadow than flesh, directing tactical movements with expertise he had never possessed in his waking hours. During a hunting expedition with Eric and several other men, the wolf demonstrated abilities that transcended normal animal behavior. It tracked a wounded deer through terrain that would have challenged their best hunters, but more remarkably, it seemed to communicate with the village dogs through a series of subtle signals that organized them into an efficient hunting pack. Watch how he positions himself, Eric whispered as they observed the wolf coordinating the pursuit. He's thinking 3 moves ahead, anticipating where the deer will turn before it knows itself. That's not hunting instinct, that's strategy. The deer was brought down cleanly, with minimal suffering, and the wolf ensured that the village dogs received their fair share of the meat before claiming any for itself. The consideration it showed for lesser animals reflected a noble character that impressed even the most hardened. Warriors among them, word of the wolf's remarkable abilities began spreading to neighboring settlements. Traders carried stories of the beast that could predict weather, find lost children, and guard livestock with supernatural dedication. Some visitors came specifically to see this legendary creature, offering silver and goods for the chance to witness its intelligence firsthand. They're starting to call him the Wolf of Nordheim, a trader informed Gunnar during one such visit. Stories travel faster than horses these days. Spoke 3 days' journey from here, know about your remarkable companion. The wolf seemed aware of its growing reputation, carrying itself with a dignity that bordered on regal bearing. Yet it remained gentle with children, patient with the elderly, and protective of anyone the village considered part of their community. Its loyalty was absolute, but its wisdom guided every action with careful consideration. As autumn deepened toward winter, Gunnar noticed that the runestone fragment had begun glowing softly whenever the wolf was nearby. The ancient symbols seemed more vibrant in the beast's presence, as if the creature's proximity awakened some dormant magic within the carved stone. The old stories speak of such artifacts, Astrid explained during one of their evening conversations. Talismans that responded to the presence of divine creatures, growing brighter when touched by power from the spirit realm. If the saga book speaks truly, your wolf may be more than we dare imagine. That night, Gunnar dreamed of standing beside the wolf atop a mountain peak while storm clouds gathered on the horizon. In the distance, dark shapes moved across the sea, ships bearing warriors whose intentions promised nothing but destruction. When he woke, the certainty remained that something dangerous was approaching their peaceful valley, and that both he and the wolf would soon be tested in ways they could not yet comprehend. The bond between man and beast had grown stronger with each passing day, but Gunnar sensed that their greatest challenges lay ahead, hidden beyond the horizon, like storm clouds gathering for a tempest that would reshape everything they held dear. The war horn of their ancestors hung in the village's great hall, its bronze surface green with age and carved with spiraling patterns that spoke of battles fought when the world was younger. Gunnar had passed it countless times without giving it more than a respectful glance, but now it commanded his attention with troubling persistence. The ancient instrument seemed to hum with barely contained energy whenever the giant wolf was near, as if responding to some invisible force that emanated from the beast. Eric noticed the phenomenon first during a village meeting where they discussed preparations for the winter harvest. The wolf had entered the hall to seek shelter from a sudden rainstorm, shaking droplets from its silver coat before settling beside the great hearth. The moment the beast crossed the threshold, the war horn began resonating with a low, musical tone that made every warrior present reach instinctively for their weapons. "By Thor's hammer!" Eric breathed, staring at the horn with wide eyes. "That thing hasn't made a sound since my grandfather's time. It was blown to rally our warriors when the sea raiders attacked 30 years past." The wolf tilted its massive head toward the horn, ears pricked forward with obvious interest. Those storm-grey eyes studied the ancient bronze as if recognizing something significant in its weathered surface. When Gunnar approached to examine the artifact more closely, the resonance grew stronger, filling the hall with harmonics that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. "The old stories say that horn was forged in the time of heroes," Astrid observed, her voice hushed with reverence. "When men and gods fought side by side against enemies that threatened the very order of the world. It was blessed by Odin himself to call warriors to righteous battle. That same afternoon, the wolf's behavior shifted in ways that set the entire village on edge. The beast began pacing the perimeter of their settlement with restless energy, its attention constantly drawn toward the eastern hills, where the morning sun rose from behind layers of pine and stone. Its usual calm demeanor was replaced by watchful alertness that reminded everyone of a predator preparing for hunt or conflict. "Something's coming," Gunnar told Eric as they stood together watching the wolf patrol the village boundaries. "He's been like this for 3 days now, ever since that horn started resonating. Whatever he senses out there, it's getting closer." Eric's weathered face creased with concern as he studied the horizon. His years of experience in battle had taught him to trust unusual signs when conventional wisdom failed to provide answers. "My gut tells me you're right. Should we send scouts to the eastern passes?" Before Gunnar could respond, the wolf raised its massive head and howled, a sound unlike any they had heard from the beast before. The call rose and fell with haunting beauty, carrying across the valley with crystalline clarity that seemed to reach beyond the physical world into realms of spirit and memory. As the wolf's voice faded, the war horn answered with its own deep resonance, the two sounds harmonizing in ways that made the hair on every listener's neck stand on end. Young Bjorn came running from the fields where he had been helping with the late harvest, his face pale with excitement and fear. "Ships," he gasped, pointing toward the eastern hills. "Strange ships on the river beyond the ridge. I climbed the tall pine to look for lost sheep and saw them through the morning mist." The men of the village gathered quickly, weapons at hand as they followed Bjorn to his observation point. From the top of the ancient pine that marked their eastern boundary, they could indeed see foreign vessels moving slowly up the river that fed their valley. The ships were unlike any trading vessels they knew, long and narrow, built for speed rather than cargo, with prowling figureheads that suggested military purpose. "Raiders," Eric said grimly, his hand tightening on his sword hilt. The wolf knew they were coming before any human eye could spot them. "How is that possible?" The giant wolf had followed them to the tree, its massive form tense with anticipation as it gazed toward the approaching ships. Its supernatural senses had detected the threat days before human observation confirmed what instinct had already proclaimed. Now it stood like a living statue of watchfulness, every muscle coiled for action, yet holding back as if waiting for some signal that only it could recognize. "We need to prepare the village for defense," Gunnar said, surprised by the tactical clarity that suddenly filled his mind. "Move the children and elderly to the cave system in the northern hills. Set up observation posts here and at the river bend. If they mean us harm, we'll know soon enough." The next few hours passed in controlled urgency as the villagers prepared for potential conflict. Weapons were distributed, supplies were gathered, and evacuation routes were established with efficiency that impressed even Eric's military sensibilities. The wolf seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, positioning itself at key defensive points and responding to Gunnar's directions with intelligence that bordered on human comprehension. As evening approached, advance scouts reported that the strange ships had made camp at the river's mouth, their crews remaining aboard while smoke from cooking fires drifted across the water. The vessels bore no familiar markings, and their occupants showed none of the openness typical of honest traders seeking peaceful commerce. "They're studying us," Eric observed, consulting with Gunnar and Astrid as they planned their response. Professional soldiers would make camp on shore and establish a perimeter. These men stay on their ships because they're planning something that requires quick departure. The wolf paced restlessly between the village center and the eastern watchposts, its behavior growing more agitated as darkness fell. When the first cooking fires were lit in the settlement, the beast howled again, a warning call that echoed off the surrounding hills and prompted answering calls from the war horn that no human hand had touched. The horn responds to the wolf's voice, Astrid realized, her eyes bright with understanding. They're connected somehow, bound by forces older than our settlement. The wolf is awakening powers that have slept since the age of legends. Gunnar found himself remembering tactical knowledge he had never learned, strategic principles that seemed to flow from some ancestral well of military wisdom. He positioned sentries with expertise that surprised his own conscious mind, anticipating enemy movements through insight that felt borrowed from a more experienced commander's memories. "Whatever's coming, we'll be ready," he promised the assembled villagers as they gathered for what might be their last peaceful evening together. "The wolf brought us warning, and we'll use that gift wisely." The giant wolf settled beside the war horn in the great hall, its presence causing the ancient bronze to resonate with sustained harmonics that filled the air with anticipatory tension. Tomorrow would bring answers to questions they had never thought to ask, and challenges that would test everything they believed about themselves and their remarkable guardian. In the distance, campfires flickered on foreign ships while unknown men made plans in foreign tongues. The pendant appeared around Astrid's neck on the morning when frost first kissed the meadow grass, its existence as sudden and inexplicable as dawn breaking over the eastern peaks. She woke to find the silver disc resting against her heart, its surface carved with an intricate design that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. At its center lay what appeared to be a stylized eye, Odin's own symbol of wisdom and foresight. "I've never seen this before in my life," she told Gunnar, her voice trembling with awe and uncertainty. "Yet it feels familiar, as if I've worn it for decades. When I tried to remove it, my hands simply wouldn't obey." The pendant's most remarkable property revealed itself when the giant wolf approached. The silver disc began glowing with soft, steady light that pulsed in rhythm with the beast's breathing. The illumination was gentle but unmistakable, visible even in bright daylight as a halo of radiance that surrounded the ancient symbol. "Divine magic," Astrid whispered, watching the pendant's response to the wolf's proximity. "This is a sign from the All-Father himself, marking our guardian as something sacred." The old stories speak of such tokens appearing when the gods take direct interest in mortal affairs. The wolf seemed drawn to the pendant's light, moving closer to Astrid with reverent care. When she extended her hand toward the beast, the glow intensified, creating patterns of luminescence that danced across the wolf's silver coat like captured starlight. The effect was beautiful beyond description, transforming the already magnificent creature into something that belonged more to legend than to the everyday world. Eric arrived at Gunnar's dwelling to find them experimenting with the pendant's properties, his expression shifting from skepticism to wonder as he witnessed the magical display. "My grandfather told stories of warriors blessed by Odin's favor," he said slowly, "but I always thought them mere tales to inspire courage in young fighters." The morning brought news that transformed their situation from mysterious to urgent. The foreign ships had moved upriver during the night, positioning themselves at strategic points that suggested intimate knowledge of local geography. Worse still, their scouts reported evidence of previous camps, hidden caches of supplies that indicated these strangers had been operating in the region for weeks without detection. "They've been watching us," Gunnar realized, studying the map Eric had sketched based on the scouts' reports. Learning our routines, counting our defenders, planning their approach with military precision. This isn't a random raid, it's a calculated assault. The wolf led them to discoveries that human eyes might have missed entirely. Following the beast's nose, they found concealed supply caches buried beneath carefully arranged stones and fallen logs. The hidden stores contained weapons, dried food, and most disturbing of all, detailed drawings of their village layout complete with markings that identified key buildings and defensive positions. "They know where our children sleep," Eric said grimly, examining the sketches with a warrior's eye for tactical detail. "Where we keep our grain stores, where the elders gather for council. Someone has been providing them with information that only a villager would possess." The giant wolf growled low in its throat as it sniffed the drawings, its hackles rising at some scent that clung to the parchment. When Gunnar held the papers closer to the beast, the pendant around Astrid's neck flared with angry red light that painted the surrounding forest in crimson shadows. "These plans carry the taint of treachery," Astrid observed, her voice heavy with sorrow. "Someone we trust has betrayed our hospitality, our friendship, perhaps even our blood ties. The pendant's light reveals truth, and the truth it shows us is bitter indeed." Training intensified as the day progressed. with Eric drilling the village defenders in formations that Gunnar suggested with surprising tactical insight. The giant wolf participated in the exercises, demonstrating an understanding of military strategy that amazed even the most experienced fighters. It learned to respond to hand signals, coordinate with human warriors, and position itself for maximum effectiveness in combat scenarios. That beast fights like it was trained in Valhalla itself, one of the younger warriors observed after a particularly complex maneuver. It knows exactly when to advance, when to hold position, when to create diversions. I've seen war chiefs with less tactical sense. The village children were evacuated to the sacred caves in the northern hills, their departure marked by tearful farewells and solemn promises of reunion. Young Bjorn clung to the wolf's neck before leaving, whispering something in the beast's ear that made its eyes soften with what could only be described as affection. "Take care of Gunnar," Thora told the wolf seriously, her 15-year-old face grave with premature wisdom. "He'll need your help to keep everyone safe." As evening approached, the pendant's glow grew stronger and more frequent, responding to threats that remained invisible to human perception. The wolf's restlessness increased correspondingly, its pacing taking it to defensive positions that overlooked the most likely approaches to their settlement. The foreign ships moved again under cover of darkness, advancing closer to the village while maintaining careful formations that spoke of professional military discipline. Their crews made no effort to communicate or announce peaceful intentions, a silence that confirmed the defenders' worst suspicions about their visitors' motives. "Tomorrow brings the storm," Gunnar told the assembled villagers as they made final preparations for battle. "Whatever these strangers want from us, they mean to take it by force. But we're not helpless farmers waiting for slaughter. We have advantages they couldn't anticipate. A guardian whose abilities exceed their understanding, and weapons blessed by powers older than their ambitions." The wolf took position atop the great hall, its massive silhouette clearly visible against the star-filled sky. From that vantage point, it could observe all approaches to the village while remaining ready to leap into action wherever the need proved greatest. The pendant's light reflected in its storm-gray eyes, creating twin stars of divine radiance that seemed to pierce the darkness with supernatural clarity. Eric positioned his warriors according to plans that felt both familiar and foreign to Gunnar's mind, as if he was remembering strategies learned in dreams or borrowed from ancestral memories. The defensive positions formed a pattern that maximized their limited numbers while creating overlapping fields of observation and mutual support. "If they come at dawn, they'll face the sun in their eyes," Eric noted with satisfaction. "And if they wait for darkness, our wolf will see them long before we would. Either way, they'll find us harder prey than they expect." The war horn hung ready beside the great hearth, its bronze surface gleaming with reflected firelight as it waited to sing its ancient song of battle and defiance. When the time came to sound the alarm, the combined voices of horn and wolf would carry their warning across the valley with supernatural power that would shake the very foundations of the earth. As the villagers settled into their final preparations, each person carrying out tasks with quiet determination, the giant wolf began a low, continuous growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. The sound was felt more than heard, a subsonic rumble that spoke of power barely held in check and fury ready to be unleashed in defense of those it had sworn to protect. "They're moving," Gunnar said, feeling the truth of it in his bones, even before the wolf's behavior confirmed his instincts. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together, man and beast, mortal and divine, standing as one against those who would destroy our peace." The pendant pulsed with steady light as Astrid placed her hand on Gunnar's shoulder, her aged fingers conveying strength and blessing through the simple touch. Around them, the village of Nordheim prepared for its greatest test, defended by ordinary people who had been touched by extraordinary grace. The storm struck with supernatural fury just as the first enemy ships reached the village's outer defenses. bringing winds that howled like the voices of the damned, and lightning that split the sky with blinding intensity. Rain fell in sheets so dense that visibility dropped to mere paces, transforming the familiar landscape into an alien battlefield where friends and enemies alike struggled to find their footing on treacherous, mud-slicked ground. In the midst of this chaos, as Gunnar fought to maintain his position behind the hastily constructed barricades, something impossible happened to the giant wolf. The beast stood atop the great hall as lightning struck repeatedly around the village, and with each flash of celestial fire, its form seemed to grow more luminous until it blazed with inner light that rivaled the storm itself. Then, in a moment that seared itself into the memory of every witness, a collar of pure starlight materialized around the wolf's neck. The celestial band appeared gradually, beginning as sparkles of silver radiance that coalesced into solid form with the slow inevitability of dawn breaking over mountain peaks. The collar bore constellations that matched the winter sky above their valley, each star a point of brilliance that pulsed with the rhythm of cosmic forces beyond mortal understanding. By all the gods, Eric breathed, his sword forgotten in his hand as he stared at the transformed beast. That's no ordinary wolf. That's Fenrir's blood, Astrid finished, her voice filled with awe and terrible understanding. A descendant of the great wolf that the gods themselves feared. The old stories speak truly. When the ancient bloodlines awaken, they manifest the power of their divine ancestry. The wolf's transformation was not merely visual. Its already impressive size seemed to increase, though whether through actual growth or some trick of divine radiance was impossible to determine. More importantly, its presence now carried weight that pressed against mortal consciousness, like the proximity of something vast and primordial that had stepped temporarily into the mundane world. The attacking raiders paused in their assault, staring at the blazing apparition that had appeared above their target. These were not ordinary Vikings seeking plunder and glory, as the defenders had initially assumed. Their weapons bore runes of binding and shadow. Their armor was crafted from metals that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and their eyes held the vacant stare of men whose souls had been claimed by powers that demanded absolute obedience. Cursed berserkers, Astrid realized with growing horror. They serve something darker than mere human ambition. Look at their weapons. Those runes are meant to bind divine spirits, to capture power that belongs to the realm of gods. The truth struck Gunnar like a physical blow as pieces of a larger puzzle fell into place with sickening clarity. The detailed maps found in the hidden caches, the intimate knowledge of village defenses, the timing that had brought these supernatural enemies just as the wolf's true nature was beginning to manifest. None of it was coincidence. "They're not here for our gold or our land," he said, his voice cutting through the storm's fury. "They've come for the wolf." Someone told them about his abilities, guided them to our village at exactly the moment when his divine heritage would be most vulnerable to their binding magic. The berserker chief raised a weapon that seemed to drink light from the very air around it, an axe whose blade was forged from metal that predated human civilization. Dark runes crawled along its surface like living things, pulsing with malevolent energy that made the storm's lightning pale by comparison. When he pointed the cursed blade toward the wolf, the celestial collar flared with defensive radiance that turned night briefly into day. "That collar marks him as a guardian, sent by the All-Father himself," Astrid shouted over the wind, her pendant blazing with sympathetic light. "But it also makes him a target for every dark force that opposes the god's will. These berserkers serve something that wants to capture divine power for its own purposes." The wolf's eyes had changed along with its collar. The storm-grey irises now shot through with veins of starlight that seemed to hold the depth of cosmic space. When it looked down at Gunnar, he felt a connection form between their minds, not the simple bond of man and beast, but something approaching telepathic communication that carried thoughts and emotions with crystalline clarity. "I am Grimjaw," the wolf's voice echoed in Gunnar's consciousness. speaking words in the old tongue with dignity that befitted a creature of legend. Last son of Fenrir's line, sent by the gods to prepare mortal warriors for the darkness that stirs beyond the edge of the world. You are my chosen companion, descendant of the wolf riders who served Odin in the days when giants walked the earth. The revelation staggered Gunnar both mentally and physically. His family's peaceful history as traders and craftsmen suddenly revealed itself as a careful disguise maintained across generations to hide their true heritage. The tactical knowledge that had been flowing into his mind, the strategic insights that felt borrowed from ancestral memory, all of it was real. Inherited wisdom from warrior bloodlines that stretched back to the age of gods and heroes. The berserkers know what you are, Grimjaw continued, his mental voice urgent with warning. Their master seeks to claim divine power through capture and corruption. If they succeed in binding me with their cursed weapons, both our peoples and the balance between light and darkness will be endangered. The enemy chief began chanting in a language that predated human speech, his cursed axe responding with waves of shadow that sought to entangle the wolf's radiant form. Other berserkers joined their voices to his, creating a harmony of darkness that made the very air around them thicken with malevolent energy. But the collar of stars was not merely decorative. As the binding spell reached toward Grimjaw, the celestial band blazed with defensive power that shattered the dark magic like ice beneath a hammer blow. The backlash sent several berserkers tumbling across the muddy ground, their cursed weapons smoking from contact with divine force. The collar protects him, Gunnar realized, but it also announces his presence to every supernatural entity within leagues of our village. We're not just fighting these berserkers, we're standing at the center of a conflict between gods and whatever. Dark power commands their loyalty, Grimjaw leaped down from the grate, all with fluid grace that defied his massive size, landing beside Gunnar with paws that barely disturbed the muddy earth. The wolf's transformation had revealed abilities that transcended mortal understanding, but it had also escalated their conflict beyond anything a simple farming village should be expected to survive. They will not stop, Grimjaw warned, his stellar collar casting protective light around the defenders. Their master has waited centuries for one of my bloodline to manifest in the mortal realm. This attack is only the beginning. Greater darkness gathers beyond the horizon, drawn by the same divine radiance that marks me as a guardian. The storm continued to rage around them, but now Gunnar understood that the weather was not natural. The berserkers had brought supernatural tempest as cover for their assault, bending the very elements to serve their dark purpose. If Nordheim was to survive this night, it would require more than human courage and steel. It would demand the full awakening of powers that had slumbered since the dawn of the world. The shield of echoing voices materialized in Gunnar's hands, as if called forth by desperate need. Its bronze surface inscribed with spiraling patterns that seemed to move in the shifting light of Grimjaw's stellar collar. The ancient artifact felt familiar in his grip, despite its sudden appearance, as though his fingers had traced its rim 1,000 times in dreams he could barely remember. As he raised the shield, spectral figures began emerging from its polished surface, the ghostly forms of warrior ancestors whose blood flowed in his veins. They appeared as translucent shapes wreathed in silver mist, their phantom weapons gleaming with the same ethereal light that marked their passage between worlds. Great-grandfather Thorvald, Astrid whispered in recognition, her pendant blazing as the spirits gathered around them. And Bjorn the Bold, who fell defending the pass from giant kin. They've come to guide us in our darkest hour. The ancestral spirits spoke without words, their counsel flowing directly into Gunnar's mind through the mystical connection forged by the shield. Tactical knowledge flooded his consciousness, formations perfected over centuries of warfare, strategies tested against supernatural enemies, and most importantly, the secret of fighting alongside a divine wolf whose power could tip the balance between light and darkness. Position your warriors in the hammer formation, Thorvald's spirit advised, his voice echoing from beyond the veil of death. Let the wolf be your anvil, while mortal steel becomes the striking force. The berserkers serve shadow, but shadows flee before coordinated light. Eric rallied the village defenders with efficiency born from years of military training. But now his movements carried new purpose, as Gunnar shared the ancestral wisdom flowing through the shield. The fighters arranged themselves in patterns that maximized their limited numbers while creating overlapping fields of protection that would allow Grimjaw to strike without fear of harming his human allies. The children are safe in the sacred caves, Thora reported, returning from the evacuation with mud-streaked clothes and determination that made her seem far older than her 15 years. The runes carved there by our forefathers still hold power. No dark magic can penetrate those ancient protections. Grimjaw paced the village perimeter with predatory grace, his stellar collar casting protective radiance that revealed the true extent of their enemies' numbers. The cursed berserkers had brought nearly 50 warriors, but worse than their numerical advantage was the supernatural darkness that clung to their weapons and armor like living shadow. They've been preparing for this assault for months, Gunnar realized, studying the enemy formations through eyes enhanced by ancestral sight. Look how they position themselves. They know exactly where to strike to bypass our strongest defenses. The berserker chief stood apart from his warriors, his cursed axe raised toward the storm-torn sky as he chanted in the ancient tongue of binding. Dark energy spiraled around the weapon's blade, growing stronger with each repetition of the forbidden words. When the spell reached its culmination, tendrils of shadow would reach out to entangle Grimjaw's divine essence, dragging the wolf's power into servitude of whatever malevolent force commanded the raider's loyalty. The binding spell grows stronger. Grimjaw warned, his mental voice tense with urgency. If it succeeds in claiming me, the darkness will have a foothold in this realm that could spread across the entire land. Your people's courage is admirable, but mortal weapons alone cannot break chains forged from corrupted starlight. Astrid approached with her leather-bound saga book clutched against her chest, its ancient pages fluttering in the supernatural wind that surrounded the battle. The old stories speak of a counter-ritual, she called out, her voice carrying over the storm's fury. When divine wolves faced binding magic in the elder days, their human companions could forge new connections that transformed both warrior and guardian into something greater than either could achieve alone. The ritual she described required trust that transcended normal human understanding, a willing merger of consciousness that would allow man and wolf to share not just thoughts, but very essence. The process was dangerous, potentially fatal to the human participant if their will proved insufficient to contain divine power. But it offered their only hope of breaking the berserker's supernatural advantages. The shield of echoing voices can anchor the ritual, one of the ancestral spirits explained, his phantom form gesturing toward the mystical patterns inscribed on the bronze surface. But the choice must be freely made by both participants. Divine power cannot be stolen or forced. It must be offered willingly and accepted with pure intent. Gunnar looked into Grimjaw's stellar eyes and saw not just animal intelligence but ancient wisdom that spanned centuries of existence. The wolf had chosen him as companion, had protected his village and guided his people through growing dangers with patience and loyalty that humbled his human heart. Now the time had come to reciprocate that trust with a commitment that would reshape the very foundation of his being. "I'm ready," he said simply, kneeling beside the massive wolf and placing one hand on the shield's center, while the other rested on Grimjaw's neck, just below the collar of stars. "If this is what it takes to protect our people, then let us forge whatever bond the gods intended." The connection formed instantly, a rush of shared consciousness that threatened to overwhelm Gunnar's mortal mind with the vast scope of Grimjaw's divine heritage. He experienced fragments of the wolf's memories, battles fought in the twilight of the gods, journeys across realms, where physics bent to the will of cosmic forces, and the patient vigil maintained while waiting for the prophesied time when mortal and divine would unite against encroaching darkness. Eric positioned the defenders, according to the tactical plans flowing from Gunnar's enhanced awareness, creating a defensive formation that would funnel the berserkers into killing zones, where concentrated firepower could overcome their supernatural protections. The ancestral spirits took positions among the living warriors, their phantom weapons adding ethereal strength to mortal steel. The binding spell reaches its culmination, Astrid warned, watching as the berserker chief's cursed axe began radiating tendrils of corrupted energy. Whatever you're going to do, it must happen now before their dark magic gains enough strength to overwhelm divine protection. The ritual required one final element, a willing sacrifice of individual identity in service of something greater. Gunnar felt his consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of mortal flesh, merging with Grimjaw's divine essence until the distinction between man and wolf became meaningless. They were still separate beings, but now they fought with unified purpose and shared power that transformed both participants into something unprecedented in the annals of legend. The stellar color blazed with new intensity as the merger completed, its light reaching out to embrace Gunnar in radiance that marked him as clearly as it did his wolf companion. When the berserkers saw this transformation, their confident advance faltered as they realized they faced not just a divine guardian, but a warrior who had been blessed with the same celestial power. The storm reached its peak as supernatural forces clashed above the village, lightning and shadow warring for supremacy, while mortal and divine prepared for a confrontation that would echo across the realms of both earth and spirit. The berserker chief's cursed axe erupted with malevolent energy as the dark ritual reached its crescendo, sending tendrils of shadow racing across the battlefield toward Grimjaw's blazing form. The weapon's blade had been forged in the depths of Helheim itself, its metal corrupted by centuries of exposure to the darkest powers that opposed the god's will. When swung in battle, it could cleave through divine protection as easily as mortal flesh, making it the perfect tool for capturing and binding creatures of celestial origin. The cursed berserkers advanced through the storm with inhuman coordination, their movements synchronized by the malevolent intelligence that commanded their souls. Rain seemed to avoid their corrupted forms, and lightning bent away from their weapons as they pressed forward with the inexorable determination of the damned. These were no longer men driven by greed or glory. They had become vessels for something ancient and hungry that viewed divine power as sustenance to be consumed. Grimjaw moved like liquid starlight. Given physical form, his massive frame flowing between defensive positions with grace that defied his size. The stellar collar around his neck blazed with protective radiance that created barriers of light wherever the berserkers tried to advance. But the cursed axe's power grew stronger with each moment, threatening to overwhelm even divine defenses. Eric led the village defenders in a coordinated charge that caught the first wave of berserkers off guard. His battle cry echoing across the muddy battlefield as steel met corrupted iron in showers of sparks. The ancestral spirits fought alongside their living descendants, phantom weapons striking with ethereal force that could penetrate supernatural armor where mortal blades failed. "Hold the line!" Eric shouted, his swordwork displaying decades of hard-won experience as he cut down two berserkers in quick succession. Don't let them reach the wolf. But the enemy's true objective was not simple victory in battle. They sought to create an opening for their chief's binding magic to take hold. Even as they fought and died against the defenders' fierce resistance, the berserkers were positioning themselves in a ritual pattern that would amplify the cursed axe's power exponentially. Gunnar felt the tactical situation shifting through his enhanced awareness, his mind now processing information with supernatural clarity that revealed the enemy's true strategy. The berserkers were willing to sacrifice themselves to create the conditions necessary for their master's success, transforming their own deaths into fuel for the dark ritual that would claim Grimjaw's divine essence. They're forming a blood circle, he realized with growing horror. Every berserker that falls strengthens the binding spell. We're not fighting for victory. We're feeding their magic with every enemy we kill. The revelation came almost too late. As the village defenders pressed their advantage, cutting down berserkers with increasing confidence, the cursed axe began resonating with the life force of the fallen enemies. Dark energy spiraled upward from each corpse, weaving itself into chains of shadow that reached toward Grimjaw with hungry intent. The great wolf was forced to retreat from the advancing corruption, his stellar collar flaring with defensive light that barely held the binding magic at bay. For the first time since the battle began, doubt flickered in those cosmic eyes as divine power struggled against forces specifically designed to corrupt and capture celestial essence. The axe draws strength from death itself. Grimjaw warned through their shared consciousness. Every fallen enemy becomes a link in the chain that seeks to bind me. Your people fight bravely, but their victory serves our enemy's purpose. The berserker chief raised his cursed weapon higher, dark runes along its blade blazing with malevolent triumph as the binding spell approached completion. The shadows reaching toward Grimjaw grew thicker and more substantial, taking on the appearance of actual chains that rattled with the sound of cosmic discord. "Stop fighting!" Gunnar commanded, his voice carrying across the battlefield with authority enhanced by divine power. "Fall back to defensive positions. Don't give them any more deaths to fuel their magic." But the order came too late for some. Young Sven, barely 18 and eager to prove his courage, pressed forward in pursuit of a retreating berserker and walked directly into the path of the cursed axe. The corrupted blade caught him across the chest, and his life force joined the dark energy, spiraling toward the binding spell with devastating effect. The chains of shadow solidified into visible form, reaching out to wrap around Grimjaw's legs and torso with the inevitability of fate itself. The stellar collar blazed with protective radiance, but even divine power had limits when faced with magic specifically designed to corrupt and capture creatures of celestial origin. "No!" Gunnar's cry echoed with anguish as he felt the binding spell's touch through their shared consciousness. The sensation was like ice water flooding his veins, carrying with it the promise of eternal servitude to powers that viewed all creation as resources to be consumed. Eric rallied the remaining defenders around Grimjaw's position, forming a protective circle that held the surviving berserkers at bay while their chief completed his dark ritual. But they could only watch in helpless fury as the binding chains tightened around the great wolf's divine essence, threatening to drag both guardian and chosen companion into a servitude that would doom not just their village, but the entire balance between light and darkness. The sacred grove's heartstone blazed to life beneath Grimjaw's paws as the great wolf pressed against the ancient monument in desperate need, its crystalline surface responding to divine touch with radiance that rivaled the stellar collar's cosmic light. Hidden for generations beneath layers of moss and fallen leaves, the mystical artifact had waited for this moment when mortal and divine would need its amplifying power to forge a bond, stronger than the binding chains that sought to claim them. Gunnar felt the stone's energy surge through, their shared consciousness like lightning given liquid form, washing away the ice-cold touch of the berserker chief's corrupted magic. The Heartstone was older than human settlement in the valley, a relic from the time when gods walked openly among mortals and the boundary between realms was permeable as morning mist. Now, Grimjaw's mental voice rang with renewed strength and desperate hope. While the stone's power flows between us, we must become one entity in truth rather than merely sharing thoughts. The binding spell cannot claim what has transcended its original nature. The transformation required absolute trust and the willingness to sacrifice individual identity for something greater than either could achieve alone. Gunnar felt his consciousness expanding beyond mortal limitations as it merged completely with Grimjaw's divine essence. Their separate beings becoming facets of a single, unprecedented entity that blazed with combined power. The stellar collar's light reached out to embrace Gunnar's human form, marking him with the same celestial radiance that proclaimed Grimjaw's divine heritage. But this was not mere blessing or enhancement. It was fundamental transformation that created something new in the annals of both mortal and supernatural history. Together, they moved with fluid coordination that defied physical possibility. Gunnar's tactical knowledge perfectly matched with Grimjaw's supernatural abilities. The Heartstone's amplifying power flowed through their merged consciousness, allowing them to strike with force that shattered the Berserker Chief's binding spell, like glass beneath a hammer blow. The cursed axe's dark energy recoiled from their combined assault, its corrupted runes flickering and failing as divine power overwhelmed the weapon's malevolent enchantments. The Berserker Chief staggered backward, his eyes wide with disbelief as he witnessed the failure of magic that had never been defeated in centuries of dark service. "Impossible," he snarled in the ancient tongue, raising his weapon for a desperate final strike. "No mortal can contain divine essence without being consumed by its power. You should be ash and memory, not standing before me as an equal." But Gunnar was no longer merely mortal, and Grimjaw was no longer simply divine. Their merged consciousness had transcended the limitations of both states, creating a being that could channel cosmic power through human will while tempering celestial fury with mortal wisdom. The battle that followed was brief but absolute in its resolution. Moving as one entity with two bodies, they struck with perfect coordination, Grimjaw's massive form creating openings that Gunnar exploited with the shield of echoing voices, while the human warrior's tactical insight guided the wolf's supernatural strength to maximum effect. The Berserker Chief's cursed axe met the shield's blessed bronze in a clash that sent shockwaves across the battlefield, shattering windows in the village and causing the ancient war horn to sing without human touch. But the corrupted weapon could not withstand the combined force of mortal courage and divine power united in perfect harmony. The axe blade cracked along its length, dark energy bleeding from the fractures like poison from a wound. The Berserker Chief screamed as the weapon's corruption turned back upon its wielder, consuming the very soul that had served darkness for so long. When the cursed blade finally shattered completely, the supernatural storm that had shrouded the battle dissipated as if it had never existed. The surviving berserkers collapsed as their binding to the dark power was severed, their cursed existence ending in merciful release rather than continued servitude. The shadows that had clung to their weapons and armor faded like nightmares before dawn, leaving only ordinary men who had paid the ultimate price for trafficking with forces beyond their understanding. Eric and the remaining defenders stood in awed silence as they witnessed the transformation of their friend and protector into something that belonged as much to legend as to their everyday world. The stellar light that marked both Gunnar and Grimjaw was beautiful beyond description, but it also carried the weight of cosmic responsibility that set them apart from ordinary mortal existence. "The binding is broken," Astrid observed, her pendant's glow confirming the absence of dark magic from the battlefield. "But the victory has changed you both in ways that cannot be undone. You have become guardians, not just of our village, but of the balance between light and darkness itself." The Heartstone's radiance gradually faded as its purpose was fulfilled, but the bond it had helped forge remained stronger than steel or sorcery. Gunnar and Grimjaw were still separate beings, but they now shared a connection that transcended the normal limitations of mortal and divine nature. As dawn broke over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the village of Nordheim stood victorious, but forever changed. They had faced the darkness and prevailed, but the cost of victory would shape their destiny for generations to come. The age of heroes had returned, And with it came responsibilities that would test everything they believed about courage, sacrifice, and the price of protecting what they held most dear. The memorial stone of the Wolf Guardian rose from the village square like a beacon of carved memory, its granite surface inscribed with runes that told the story of the night when darkness came to Nordheim and was driven back by the union of mortal courage and divine power. Gunnar's own hands had shaped much of the stonework. Guided by artistic skills he had never known he possessed until his bond with Grimjaw awakened dormant talents inherited from craftsman ancestors. 3 months had passed since the battle. 3 months of rebuilding and reflection, as the village came to terms with what they had witnessed and what it meant for their future. The seasonal cycles continued their eternal rhythm. Autumn harvest, followed by winter's contemplative quiet, then spring's renewal bringing fresh hope and new challenges. Yet everything felt different now, touched by the knowledge that they lived under the protection of something greater than human strength. Grimjaw bore his scars with quiet dignity, silver lines through his cosmic fur that marked where the binding chains had touched his divine essence. The stellar collar remained around his neck, though its light had settled into a gentle glow that provided comfort rather than the blazing radiance of battle. His eyes still held depths of ancient wisdom, but now they also reflected the warmth of genuine contentment as he watched over the community that had become his chosen family. The great wolf's nature had indeed changed through their shared transformation. While still possessing supernatural abilities that exceeded mortal understanding, he seemed more grounded in the physical world, more connected to the daily rhythms of village life. Children still gathered around him each morning to share their breakfast and stories, but now their interactions carried the easy familiarity of long friendship rather than awed reverence. He's found peace. Astrid observed one afternoon as they watched Grimjaw teaching young Bjorn to track deer signs through the forest underbrush. The boy had appointed himself the wolf's apprentice in woodcraft, and his enthusiasm for learning was matched only by his teacher's patient instruction. The divine fire still burns within him, but it no longer consumes. Your bond has given him something he never had before, a true home. Gunnar himself had been transformed as profoundly as his wolf companion, though the changes were more subtle and revealed themselves gradually through daily interactions. His natural gift for settling disputes had deepened into genuine wisdom that drew visitors from neighboring settlements seeking counsel on matters both practical and spiritual. The tactical knowledge inherited from his warrior ancestors remained accessible when needed, but it was tempered by a peacemaker's understanding of when conflict could be avoided entirely. Eric had embraced his role as Gunnar's lieutenant with enthusiasm that surprised everyone familiar with his previous skepticism about supernatural matters. The gruff warrior had witnessed divine power firsthand and found his own faith strengthened rather than challenged by the experience. His training sessions with the village defenders now incorporated lessons learned from fighting alongside a celestial guardian, creating techniques that could be passed down to future generations. We've become something more than a simple farming community, Eric told the assembled villagers during one of their evening gatherings. Word of our guardian has spread across the region, and people speak of Nordheim as a place where the old powers still hold sway. That brings opportunities, but also responsibilities we must be prepared to meet. The opportunities came in the form of increased trade, as merchants sought the blessing of a village protected by divine favor. Craftsmen arrived, hoping to learn techniques inspired by supernatural insight, and scholars came to study the ancient artifacts that had revealed themselves during the battle. The war horn now hung in a place of honor, where its bronze surface could catch the light from Grimjaw's collar, creating harmonies that filled the great hall with music more beautiful than any human instrument could produce. Thora had grown into a young woman whose wisdom exceeded her years, shaped by experiences that most people would never face in a lifetime of ordinary living. She had become the village's keeper of new stories, recording the events of the supernatural, battle and the changes that followed, with careful attention to detail that would allow future generations to understand their heritage. The old stories speak of heroes and legends, she told the children gathered for their weekly lessons. But they forget to mention that heroes are made from ordinary people who choose to act with courage when courage is needed most. Gunnar was a trader and peacemaker before he became a guardian. Grimjaw was a wolf seeking purpose before he found his true calling. The magic was always there, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The memorial stone served as more than just a monument to past events. It had become a focal point for the village's connection to forces greater than themselves. Travelers would often pause before the carved granite to offer prayers or seek guidance, and many reported feeling a sense of peace that lingered long after they departed Nordheim. Young Ingrid, now 9 years old and bold, with the confidence of someone who had been rescued by a divine wolf, often led groups of visitors to the stone with the authority of an official guide. Her wooden toy horse remained her constant companion, its surface now polished smooth by countless hours of play. But she had added a carved wolf figure that rode alongside the horse in adventures that spanned both imagination and memory. As winter approached again, Gunnar found himself standing beside the memorial stone in the quiet hours before dawn, reflecting on the journey that had brought him from simple village trader to guardian of something precious beyond measure. Grimjaw lay nearby, his breathing steady, with the deep contentment of a being who had found his true purpose. The stellar collar pulsed gently with the rhythm of cosmic forces that continued their eternal dance across the heavens. Somewhere beyond the edge of their peaceful valley, other challenges waited to test the balance between light and darkness. But for now, in this moment of perfect stillness, the guardian and his wolf companion watched over a community that had been touched by divine grace and found worthy of protection. The age of legends had not ended. It had simply found new guardians to carry its light forward into an uncertain but hopeful future, where ordinary people could become extraordinary when love and courage guided their choices. The memorial stone would stand as testament to that truth for generations yet to come, reminding all who saw it that miracles began with simple acts of kindness and grew through the power of unshakable faith in the bonds that connected all living things. The morning sun crested the eastern hills, painting the carved granite in shades of gold and amber, while Grimjaw's collar responded with gentle starlight that seemed to welcome the dawn. In the distance, smoke began rising from cottage chimneys as the village stirred to life, each family secure in the knowledge that they were protected by guardians who understood the true meaning of service. Gunnar placed his hand on the memorial stone's smooth surface, feeling the warmth of carved memory beneath his palm. The inscription he had crafted with his own tools told their story in runes both ancient and eternal. Here stood Gunnar Ironson and Grimjaw the Guardian, mortal and divine united in defense of those they loved. May their bond inspire courage in all who face the darkness. The carved words caught the morning light and held it, glowing with inner radiance that promised the story would endure long after its creators had passed into legend themselves. Children not yet born would learn of the trader who freed a wolf from a market cage, never knowing that his act of simple kindness would awaken powers that protected their peaceful world. As the village came fully awake around them, Guardian and Wolf began their daily patrol of the boundaries, watching for any sign that darkness might return to threaten their chosen people. But for now, all was well in Nordheim, where legends lived and ordinary folk learned that the greatest magic came from hearts willing to offer love without reservation. The stellar collar pulsed once more with cosmic contentment, and Grimjaw's answering rumble carried notes of satisfaction that spoke of duty fulfilled and purpose discovered. Together, they walked into the growing light of a new day, ready for whatever challenges the future might bring, secure in the knowledge that some bonds could never be broken by time or distance or even death itself. The age of heroes lived on in the memorial stone's carved promise, in the children's bright laughter, and in the endless dance of starlight that marked a guardian's eternal vigil over those he had sworn to protect.